Thanks for dropping in. Some of my most popular designs have been fidget toys. But the truth is, those designs have almost always been accidental creations. While testing out mechanisms for larger projects, I'll occasionally find something that's fun to play with all on its own. And so, another fidget toy is created. This week's design came about the same way. A future project needed a very reliable and extremely simple push button that didn't use extra hardware or a ton of individual parts. The result was the Snappy fidget button. This button uses a set of flat springs that flare out slightly in the middle. Pressing the button squeezes the spring inward until the button pops into its next position. So, like I said, simple. But more importantly, it was fun to just mindlessly click. So I made a few tweaks to the design and printed it again, and then again, and then a dozen more times to get everything to work exactly how I wanted. And here are the designs that survived that process. A single simple button, a 3-button row, a 4-button square, a rather giant 9-button square, and my favorite, the tall button, which is a perfect size to fidget with in one hand. I also printed a ton of button caps, mostly because they only take 2 grams of plastic each, and they're a good way to use up scrap filament. I even broke into my special reserve of glittery protopasta filaments, as well as this extra fill gold filament by Filamentum. To give the buttons a little oomph, I set the top layer to print this concentric pattern. It gives the buttons a machined look with very little additional effort. To give this pattern the best chance of showing up, I printed it right side up, even though that means that there was a little bit of bridging on the inside. I just think it looks better that way. Assembly is really easy, but first we need to pick between one of 3 possible spring options: stiff, normal, or soft. They look nearly identical, so to make them easier to distinguish, I added dots to the tops of each spring. More dots mean a stiffer spring. For this assembly, I'm going to use the normal spring. It's just soft enough that you can easily press it with a single finger. But it's not so soft that it doesn't provide a nice snap. The first step is to slide the spring into the frame. Just make sure that you orient the spring so that these sides that flex line up with 2 small chamfers on either side of the frame hole. If you put it in the wrong way, the connection will be too tight, and there won't be any snap action. Instead, this piece will just fly out the other end. Once the spring is in, it's time to glue on the caps. I decided to use a gel glue for this project to make sure the 2 parts hold together, even if their surfaces don't match up perfectly. As the glue dries, push the mechanism into a half press, so that way neither button touches the frame and glues it all together. That's it for this taller style, but if you choose to print any of the other styles, you may want to consider this optional extra piece. This slides into the frame, like so, and it helps keep the spring vertically aligned. That's because if you have multiple buttons side by side, any sort of wiggle left or right may result in them colliding with each other. Here's an earlier prototype without that extra bar. As you can see, the buttons can get really messed up. And here's another copy with the bar installed. There's still a little bit of wiggle, but not enough to get it in trouble. I designed this fidget specifically so that the size of the button would be roughly the size of a thumb, but it also works scaled down. Here's a 75% scale print. Notice that it snaps without any problems at all. And this is an absolutely absurd 50% scale print. Yep, it still works. My favorite part of this design is that it can be used in so many other ways. For example, the snap is pretty strong, so you could thread something through the spring holes and use it as a fastener. If tweaked slightly, the spring could be a toy projectile. And this definitely has potential as part of a puzzle design, maybe as a combination lock, or some way to slide out hidden drawers. So you'll probably see these simple springs show up in my future projects. Or even better, maybe you will use this mechanism for your own designs. If you do that, I'd love to see it. Until the next video, I have a lot more fidgets to print before I run out of these caps. So, happy printing, and thanks for stopping by.